grandmother. Recently, she retired from Tufts University and has been a teacher in public schools most of her teaching career. Recently, she was trained by Al Gore and his friends in Pittsburgh as a climate reality spokesperson, along with 1,500 people from all over the world. She is committed to helping all of us understand the issues and showing us how we can make a difference. Please welcome Ariel Hoover. Just as a note, some of this will be filmed, but there are some slides, some portions of it that might not be filmed, so I don't know, you might hear the camera going in and out, and if you ask any questions, those might be filmed as well, just for like Waycam. No national broadcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ariel.
So welcome everyone. I'm really happy you're here. I represent Climate Reality. As she said, I was trained last fall in Pittsburgh with 1,500 other people. It was life-changing. I've been an environmentalist even before the word existed, and I always included it in my curriculum when I was teaching. However, when I went there last year, I found out I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and I learned a lot of neat and interesting and painful stuff at the same time. So I will say that this is more of a generalist presentation, so I'm going to try to cover a lot of things, and I'm hoping you'll save your questions until the end, because I need to go through the material. I'd like to go through the material. I also will ask you if you would be kind enough to sign in, because I need to send this to, we are mandated, believe it or not, to do 10 climate presentations every year as a prerequisite for being accepted into training. So I meant to pass this out earlier, but better late than never. So I can send this around to you, if you don't mind. And here's something to write on. And I think that'll be helpful. Thank you. So I want to tell you that when I got to Pittsburgh, I was thrilled beyond belief. Because for my whole life, I felt like, oh, I don't quite fit in. I care about the environment. I don't care about material possessions very much. I don't care about anything except trying to live the life that I believe is a moral life, that is a good life, and that helps people. And so when I got there and I met all these folks from all over the world, it was life-changing for me. And I can honestly say that I wear this with pride. So, let me tell you who I am and why I'm here a little bit. As she said, my name is Ariel Hoover. I was raised on a farm outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I grew up with my cousins next door and my grandparents on this side of us. We ran wild. We played in the barn with our numerous barn cats and barn dogs and jumped off the hayloft. Maybe some of you did that too. It was an idyllic childhood because we got to stay outdoors all day long. My grandfather, as you can see, was a farmer, and he and my grandmother, that must have been her wedding day, because she never looked that nice that I can remember after that, because she was always working. My grandpa said, if you take care of the land will take care of you. And that's really true. He was a man of few words, so he didn't talk too much, but he did tell me that. This is our backyard in Sanibel Island. We have a house down there. Right now it's being utterly devastated by red tide. You may have read about it. We've had over 6,000 animals, dead animals, wash up on our shores. For some reason, the news is not coming up here. We don't know why, of what is happening down there. It's really painful to see dead dolphins and dead manatees and dead tiger sharks and things like that. But our yard, when things are clean, we have alligators, we have bobcats, we have all kinds of wonderful wildlife that makes us happy, that walks through the yard. I volunteer at a wildlife rehab hospital down there called Crow. and it's a very important part of my life. So, I'm going to tell you a lot of things that might be painful, that you probably might know, that you sort of keep back here. But I'm also going to talk about hopeful things and things that we can do to change our trajectory. Because really that's what it's all about. We have to do something. Now, we can't wait. You know, I'm an old lady, you know, sort of. And I could just say, well, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But, you know, like you, I have children, probably anyway. I have children and grandchildren, and I have a great love of this planet. And I don't want to see anything happen to it, anything terrible. So the first picture I showed you was taken in 1972 in the Apollo mission. It's our most famous picture of Earth from outer space. And above us, you see, when you look up, the beautiful blue sky. And it looks very thick, doesn't it? However, if you were to drive your car through it, you would be through it in 10 to 15 minutes. So the problem is, we're putting all this CO2 and other fossil fuel pollution into this small atmosphere. So a little brief reminder of how global warming works. It comes in, the sun radiates Earth to Earth in the form of light waves that go through the atmosphere, and it's absorbed, some of it, by the Earth and warms it. And then, of course, some is radiated back into space in the form of infrared waves. Some of it's trapped by the Earth's atmosphere and warms it. The problem, as I said, is that we're putting so much global warming pollution in there that we are trapping the equivalent of 400,000 atomic bombs equal to the ones dropped on Hiroshima every day, 365 days a year. So as the CO2 concentration increases, more of the outgoing infrared radiation is trapped. And these are some, don't film this because this one's copyrighted, 3 trillion gallons of water on the US, and that's equal to the flow of Niagara Falls for 509 days. So some of you see Niagara Falls, and I often think, I live in Lincoln, the next town over, I often think, how would we survive 509 days of Niagara Falls coming into our little town? Global warming causes storms to intensify rapidly before landfall. And it, of course, impacts hurricanes. When you have warmer oceans, they lead to more intense hurricanes. They intensify much more rapidly. And warmer air holds more moisture, leading to heavier downpours. We can tell that just from what we've been through, right, with all the humidity. It seemed terrible, the humidity, all the moisture in the air. And of course, storm surge increases due to sea level rise. And finally, we have a Wavier Jet stream. The Wavier Jet stream was something I found to be fascinating because I hadn't learned about that when I went to Pittsburgh. But here's a picture of it. The problem with a Wavier jet stream as opposed to the one that we had, I guess, when I was a kid, is that it doesn't push storms or droughts out very easily. So when Hurricane Harvey came last year, there was a high pressure up here and a high pressure up here, and the tail end of it was pulling moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico. So it just kept being replenished because there was nothing to push it out. And of course, when temperatures increase, more moisture goes into the sky. Warmer air holds a lot more water vapor, as I've already said, and the downpours get bigger. Here's an example of a rain bomb. I don't know if you've heard of this term. This was a new term for me. Over Phoenix in 2016. A rain bomb, this dropped an inch of rain in 5 minutes, which a rain bomb can do, but it also can have tornadic winds inside. So that makes for a dangerous weather episode. "30 to 50% of our annual precipitation on the U.S. West Coast occurs in just a few atmospheric river events." So you can see this atmospheric river that carry moisture all the way from, almost from Hawaii to California. And then you can see what it looked like in San Jose afterwards. Last year there was also an atmospheric river that carried moisture into Seattle, making it the wettest October to April on record. And then, of course, Odessa, Texas had another atmospheric river, and that's what happened there. So there have been 11 1-in-1,000-year downpour events in the U.S. since May of 2010. So that's 8 years now. This is made last year, so 2017. So in 7 years, there have been that many major downpour events. Harris County, Texas received 240 billion gallons of rain last April 2016. Another instance where you can compare it to Niagara Falls falling there into Houston for 3.6 days. And that's a picture of that. So here's another problem. Houston doesn't have very good zoning laws, okay? They allow people to build in their wetlands and they don't preserve them. So when things happen there, they don't have anywhere for the water to run off. And also another thing I'll point out, which is intense in my mind, is there are a lot of oil refineries and things there with lots of toxic chemicals. So when they have the flood, some of that is leaked into the water, obviously, creating another dangerous situation. This is Hammond, Louisiana, another major rainfall, 2016. Here's a startling statistic, I think. We could see a 400% increase in extreme downpours by the end of this century. Imagine 400% increase. This is Anhui Province, China, and in 2016, flooding killed more than 500 people and caused $33 billion in damage in 2016. It's an agricultural province, and of course you can't afford to lose your crops. When I was teaching in China, it was really funny. It seemed like every day on the English news that they would brag that all countries should be proud that they had food self-sufficiency, because that means they didn't need to, I will say, bother other countries for this. However, you can't sustain that if you have serious weather events. And it reminds me of World War II, when Japan decided that they needed more natural resources for their population so they could invade another country to get it. And I'm not saying that China is doing that, but there is a lot of things going on in the South China Sea that are quite frightening. And I know the Philippines and China are having some issues. They've built some artificial islands there. And I think that we, in terms of our national security, we need to be aware of what's happening in the world so that we can be prepared. I put this slide in because a lot of my students at Tufts were from Wuhan, which is the biggest city in China you've never heard of. But Munich Re, which is a very large insurance company, says the only plausible explanation for all these weather events is climate change. Believe me, the insurance companies know what's happening, right? And you and I are gonna suffer. I don't remember how much our flood insurance went up in Sanibel this year. We didn't get flooded, but nevertheless, the insurance company wasn't taking any chances. They increased our bill. Of course, the opposite side of floods is drought, and this is South Korea last May, and this reservoir is only 11% of normal. And there's a huge drought in India, causing 400 farmers to commit suicide in 2016. And last June, there were 4 African and Middle Eastern countries approaching famine. This is the largest large-scale hunger crisis since 1945. It's a huge, huge issue. I put this in because I thought we needed a little bit of lightness here, although this isn't quite as light as I'd like. But Montana was developing a craft beer industry because hops grow very well there and they grow very well in Germany. However, last year they had a very serious drought. This summer it's not as bad, but they still are having a drought. So you can see that they may not be able to bring this new industry to fruition with the effects of climate change. Another instance where climate change has impacted the world stage is in Syria. This is a farmer who said, I had 400 acres of wheat and now all I have is desert. Obviously, we will have climate refugees. We already have them. Louisiana, down in the bayous, some of those people have to move because the water is covering their homes. Miami regularly gets flooded right now from just normal tides, called king tides. So it is happening, even if we don't want to know about it. And we just have to do something about it. The Syrian Minister of Agriculture said this drought and the fallout is beyond our capacity as a country to deal with. Believe me, guys, if it's our families that are starving to death, we're going to do whatever it takes to keep them from dying, right? I don't fault them for joining ISIS. If ISIS gives them food and gives them a way to feed their families, I feel like until I walk into their shoes, how can I judge? It's a horrible thing to see your kids starve to death. So this is predicted by NASA for our country. The soil moisture, you can see the very brown is a much drier area. You can see that our breadbasket is very dry, as well as Florida and California, where we get a lot of our crops. I think Massachusetts is a little better, but still very quite dry. I feel like all summer long I'm trying to keep our garden alive in my yard. And it's been just about impossible because we don't get any rain. The fire season is now 105 days longer in the West than it was in the 1970s. I want to talk a minute about that. You all know about the Carr fire, right? That you heard on the news. Well, that destroyed over 1,000 homes and caused 8 deaths and burned 229,000 acres. But there's a fire even bigger than that in California that's not quite out yet, called the Mendocino Complex Fire, which has burned 459,000 acres. Plus, in July and August, they had 14 wildfires going in California at one time. I think we have to step up to the plate and do whatever it takes, guys, to start to mitigate some of these effects. So, Washington State Department of Ecology says, we have observed devastating wildfires, drought, lack of snowpack, and increases in ocean acidification. And those are what our future will look like if we don't take some action. Washington has 5 times as many large wildfires as it did on average in the 1970s. And we also know that in the future, the climate in large parts of the Middle East and North Africa could render some regions uninhabitable, causing climate refugees. But I guarantee you, we're going to have climate refugees too. I mean, you saw the pictures in the globe in January when the ocean was coming into the city of Boston, right? You saw that. So some of us, probably not here in this area, would probably be okay, but those folks who live on the coast will probably be climate refugees in the future. In 2014, our Department of Defense said that climate change will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions across the globe. Not only does this have an effect on our economy, it affects our food, our water, and diseases. I can't spend a lot of time on this because I couldn't find anything so far that climate change doesn't impact. And I had to choose what I would show you tonight because time is limited. But I know we all probably like to eat and we all need water to live. So I figured those were important topics. So our food supply is tremendously vulnerable to climate change and in different ways, as you can see here. So we know that every day of the growing season that temperatures go above 84 degrees, corn yields decline by 0.7%, 0.7%. But look, by the end of the century, U.S. corn yields might be a third less because of heat. A 1.8 degree Fahrenheit increase will decrease our wheat yields by 21%. And guess what? Pests love the heat. That's the problem, one of the major problems. They did a study of CO2 and soybeans, and they found that aphids and Japanese beetles love plants raised in higher CO2 conditions. They lived longer and laid more eggs, and of course it made it impossible for the plants. It weakened their immune system, so they couldn't fight against the plant-eating pests. And of course, other things that are affected are diseases, such as wheat rust, which doesn't like higher temperatures and humidity, so it can cause your crops to you lose 20 to 30% of your crops. And then, of course, the nutritional value of food is being compromised as well. Food crops like rice, wheat, and soybeans are threatened because their nutritional value is going down. 100 to 2, according to WGBH, they had a program on this week, 100 to 200 million people will be at risk of nutrient deficiency. And the poorest people are, of course, the ones most vulnerable. 80% of India's diet is made of cereals, and if the cereals that they're eating do not give them the nutrition they need to function well, exactly when we need the smartest people in the world solving these problems, right? So it's a real problem. And of course, you can see that the decrease in the essential minerals, zinc, iron, copper, magnesium, and calcium. And of course, toxins are more prevalent when you have higher temperatures and humidity, which threaten the lives of animals and humans. Water, let's talk about water. If all the water in the world were put in a tub, that would represent all the water that's on the earth. If you took a teaspoon and you dipped it in, that's how much would be fresh water. So you see our supply of fresh water is quite limited. It's threatened by climate events like hurricanes and fracking and drilling and all those things. Only 2% on water on the earth is fresh water, and only 1% is readily available for our use. How do we use our water? Well, 12% domestically, 19% for industry, and 69% for agriculture. When temperatures go up, water use goes up, obviously. Water scarcity's effect on GDP, you can see that these are countries that could lose up to 6% of their GDP if by 2050. We know that we're depleting the groundwater in southwest Kansas, and that 35% of it won't be able to support irrigation within the next 30 years. And that's part of our breadbasket, so it's quite serious there. Snow's already melting 30 days earlier in Washington State, and we expect the snowpack to decline 70% by the end of this century. So those of you who love skiing, better go every year as much as possible. But they need that water also for hydroelectric and for their homes and for their businesses. So the snowpack, the lessening of the snowpack is a serious issue. Of course, that impacts cold water species such as salmon and trout. I'll talk a minute about the Amazon rainforest. As you know, that is the lungs of the earth, providing us 30% of our oxygen and sequestering carbon in the trees. When we cut the trees down in the Amazon rainforest, obviously you are releasing that carbon. What do they do it for? They do it to grow palm oil trees. I challenge each one of you, go home in your cupboard and look and see what you have that has palm oil. It's in everything. Last week I went to Donald's to get burrito skins to make burritos. I looked for 15 minutes so I could find one that didn't have palm oil in it. So it's a cheap way, it's a cheap ingredient that they can use to make products, but it's really bad for the environment. And of course, cattle ranching. As people get more money, they want to eat more meat. And cattle ranching is helping destroy South Florida, both the east and the west coast at this point, because of the waste and the fertilizer going into our waterways. I can just tell you that from my experience. But here, I'll show you something hopeful. Organic farms can sequester carbon, according to Rodell. I thought this was a really pretty one. Don't take this picture, okay, this one's of a hurricane, like we did last year in Florida. Sometimes the city's sewage system is overwhelmed, so all that goes into the street. And of course, these are all some diseases that you can get, and I think you probably know most of them. But last year, on the East Coast, I can't remember which city it was that the septic system or the sewage system failed and a lady got a flesh-eating bacteria. It's kind of gross. All right. The change in ocean pH from 8.2 to 8.1 may seem insignificant, but it's actually a difference of 25 to 30%. We are changing our oceans, obviously. Here's how I think you can understand it. We had a temperature of 94 today. I saw that. We had a 94-degree temperature. If we had a 25% hotter temperature, that we couldn't survive, I don't believe, right? How could we live when it's 120 degrees?
Sorry, that's not correct. The temperature scale is not a ratio scale, so you can't say 25% more, 25%. You'd have to use the Kelvin scale to talk about whether 25% more or 25% less made any sense.
Okay. I don't really understand what you're saying, but.
In other words, the zero is not a meaningful number on our temperature scale. Only on the Kelvin scale on there.
But isn't it what she really means is that she's using that example to say that if the temperature went up 20%.
Not 20, you can't say 25% when you're talking about Fahrenheit or centigrade. You'd have to be using an absolute temperature scale. You can't talk about percent. You can talk about degrees, but you can't talk about percent.
Well, can you translate the 25% to degrees? I mean, if she says.
Well, you'd have to start with a,
It would make it even a bigger number. Because if you started from Kelvin 0, it would be a big, 25% would be a big
well, possibly, but I'm just saying.
number. No, you're right, that is an incorrect way of doing it, but the point is still a good one, and that is that it is a major change.
No.
That's
Well,
what I'm.
people don't get, a lot of people don't get.
I mean, because pH is also a logarithmic scale, so that's another reason why it makes 0.1 a reasonably big number.
Right. We are in danger, of course, of losing our fish, and ocean acidification could result in a 10 to 8% decline in just 10 years on the west coast. Right now, guys, I can tell you what's happening in Florida, because we have that house there. The fishermen in Sanibel, they are going out of business because they can't fish. Oceans are polluted right now, the fish are dying. So that's one of our major industries down there. It seems to me that people would want to keep their livelihood, and the fishermen are trying. They can't, it's a very complicated thing, but it's very painful to watch. We also have dead zones from depleted oxygen because of large-scale and chemical-intense farming. You can see them around the world, particularly on the East Coast. And air pollution is certainly a significant issue. You can see the premature deaths per year per 1,000 kilometers squared. We have an obvious problem in the middle of our country there with air pollution. We're pretty good in parts of Massachusetts, but not perfect. And if we decimate the Clean Air Act, this can only go up. It kills about 6.5 million people a year. And the economic impacts are huge. It causes us to lose nearly 4% of our annual GDP. Last year, these were the billion-dollar disasters in our country. We had several hurricanes, as you can see down here. We had a tornado outbreak, we had a drought in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. We just had the most expensive year ever. It was a record, $306 billion. The cost of carbon is just too high. These are, as you probably already know, the cost of carbon. I wanted to look at the subsidies for renewables versus the subsidies for oil, gas, and coal. To me, that's interesting, because you follow the money trail, you know what's happening. And so in the 2015 to 2016 election cycle, oil, gas, and coal companies spent $354 million in campaign contributions and lobbying, and they got $29.4 billion in federal subsidies in total over the same years. It's an 8,200% return on investment. Has anybody in here ever got 100%, never mind 8,000 return on your investment? And you can see down here the paltry amount that renewable energy got. If we had turned that, if we could turn that on its head, we would be almost home free. Germany has spent a lot of money on developing their renewable energy sector. And last Christmas, they had extra, and people got paid to use electricity. Quite nice. I have to talk about national security implications because they're huge. The rising oceans can swallow part of our biggest naval base by the end of the century. This is not our naval base. This is actually in Washington, D.C. It's the Coast Guard headquarters, but it flooded up to the second floor from a hurricane that went through and made the Potomac River come into it. But Norfolk Naval Station is seriously under threat, as well as Miami, and 1,700 other ones. If we have a rise of 3 feet, which is possible considering all the melting ice, it would threaten 128 of our bases, valued at roughly $100 billion. But we have solutions. How do projections compare with reality? In 2000, they projected that we would have a wind capacity of 30 gigawatts by 2010. But the reality is we exceeded that in 2016 by 16 times. Our wind energy capacity keeps growing, and the cost keeps coming down. There are some utilities in Texas that are giving out free energy at night. Texas has a lot of wind, and there's a town in Texas, I'll show it on the map too, Georgetown, which is about, Georgetown down here, it's about 30 miles from Austin, the capital, has a Republican mayor. When he was looking at ways to fuel his town, he said, I want something that's cheaper and more reliable than fossil fuels. So he has wind energy there now, and he credits it with, he says it's cheaper and it's also more effective. And the best part for him as a mayor is that it has caused a lot of investment in that town. Businesses are moving there because it's good for their business, not only in terms of financial outcomes, but also because people want to do business with companies that are using renewable energy. Last year in the UK, they got more electricity from wind than coal. And wind could supply our electricity consumption 40 times over. Our storage market is growing. And we have some auto manufacturers moving to electric vehicles. So in 2002, we thought the solar energy market would grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. But in reality, it was exceeded 17 times. And in 2016, it was exceeded by 75 times. So you can see that in 2009, we had less investment in renewables, but watch how it grows. And this is 2015, the latest year I have the data for. But here's a question. Is there a precedent for such a rapid adoption of a new technology? And there is. This is what's cool. So in 1980, AT&T commissioned a study to forecast cell phone use by the year 2000. They projected 900,000 users. The actual figure was 109 million. The cost dropped, the quality improved dramatically, and all the low-income nations just leapfrogged landlines and went to the new technology. So when people say it can't be done, they're wrong. They're wrong. In India and China, they're both on track to overachieve their Paris commitments. And maybe all of you know, but just in case you don't, as I did until I went to this workshop, we are still in the Paris Climate Accords. We have 15 days after the next election to get back in. All the president has to do is write a letter and ask to be readmitted. So the vote will be very significant the next time around. I have to tell this true story too. When I was teaching in China, I wasn't teaching in Beijing or one of the fancy cities in China. I was teaching a very small by Chinese standards. I think it had a couple million people. Every apartment building, whether they were in the middle class neighborhood or the slums, had solar panels. So we could have hot water. This is about 9 years ago, guys. We need to get going here. When I was there. Enough solar energy reaches us every hour to power the world's energy needs for a full year. We have 9.8 million people who work directly or indirectly in the renewable energy sector. Lots of good jobs in this field. Wind turbine service technician is forecast to be the fastest growing job category in the U.S. through 2024. Gore showed us a movie about a wind turbine school. I think it was in Colorado or Wyoming, one of those western states. And it was wonderful to see both men and women getting trained to be doing this, because it's a really good paying job. And of course, there are more jobs in solar than there are in coal. And retrofitting old buildings to make them energy efficient is predicted to be a lucrative job opportunity as well through 2023. And finally, a quote from Tomas Regalado, the mayor of Miami, who said, anybody who thinks this is a partisan issue is not focused on reality, which we as public officials and citizens are dealing with. This is a crisis that grows day by day. If you saw your city going underwater, you'd want to deal with it, I'm sure. We can solve this issue together. And the last downer I have for you is the problem with plastic. So, as you all know, probably, plastic's an issue because it doesn't decompose for a very long time. There's been a lot of articles and newscasts lately that have talked about the fact that when you're eating fish, sometimes you eat pieces of plastic, which is terrifying, really. Since I work in the animal rehab hospital as a volunteer, I will share with you that seeing a sea turtle coming in, starving to death, because he can't dive, because he's got so much plastic in his stomach, is heartbreaking. And I'm on a mission when I go to Starbucks, when I go to wherever I go, if they have straws out, I say, hey, do you know what you're actually contributing to? Because straws are the worst. We can do something about that. In Lincoln, I'm proud to say that the high school students did it. They went before town meeting. They said, we want to ban plastic bags, straws, and single-serve water bottles. And it passed. So now Lincoln, your neighbor, will be free of these by October. And I'm real proud of those kids, because they're the ones that did it. This is their future, really. I was hoping some teenagers would be here tonight, so I could help them think about doing that. Okay, so let's do some practical talk. What can I do to fight climate change? Obviously, when you buy less stuff, that helps the environment. If you drive less, if you take public transportation, if you walk or bike more, that's also a good thing to do. Use shared economy services. So for example, if you have a snow blower and your neighbor has something you need to use, you could do an exchange, because you don't both need both things, right? Buy green products, they have fewer toxins. You don't really want to eat pesticides because you don't know what's in there. And the farmer's market in Wayland is fabulous, actually. It has some organic organic produce. And also the Lincoln one on Saturday, our neighbor has an organic farm, and they're there, so they can eat very well. Talking about eating less meat sometimes makes people's heads spin, but here's what I say. Can you do without meat one day a week? Can you give it up one day a week? You don't have to eat tofu. You don't want to. You can eat beans, you can make tacos, you know, or something cool like that. But the more you can give up meat, the less you eat is obviously better for all of us. And better for your health too. Try to buy less packaged materials. When I go to Market Basket, I love to go to Market Basket. It's like an adventure, right? It's so full. But when I go to the organic produce section, I'm appalled. They'll take one squash and wrap it in 4 layers of plastic. Well, I'm not gonna buy 4 layers of plastic. And every time I try to find the produce manager to say people who eat organic are not going to buy this because this is wasteful, they always poo-poo me. But maybe if you guys say something, you'll see a trend. And of course, we've talked about straws and plastic water bottles and plastic bags. Those are really destroying our world. And you can change that. It just takes becoming more mindful of when you're shopping, right? And I've had this bottle now for 3 years. I'm sure I'm gonna lose it, don't worry, but at least I have used it for 3 years and I've not had to buy water bottles, little water bottles. So that's really the better way for you to travel. If you can, I don't know if you can use a bike here to get to your job, but if you have a hybrid or electric car, that's obviously wonderful. I think that my proudest possession in my life is my Prius, which gets me around, and which is not all electric, but at least it's a hybrid, and I'm happy I can have one. But get a free energy audit for your home. You can do that and find out where you're losing energy. And when you get new appliances, make sure they're Energy Star. Replace your incandescent bulbs with LEDs and insulate your home better. Use less heat in the winter and less AC in the summer. When I go out, when I was teaching, I would go out in the morning and I would turn off all the air conditioners in the summer. And then I would come back about 6 o'clock and I could put it on, you know. Then, and I didn't need so much, right, because it had pulled off. And the same with the heat when I went out. We had programmable thermostat, so I could put it down to 50 or 55, and then when I came home, turn it up to 65. And clean or replace your old filters on your heaters, your vents, or your dryer. If you can have a solar system or a solar hot water system, that's wonderful. unfortunately, in my yard, we have too many trees. We can't take them all down to get the solar panels. And of course, planting trees will help. Planting trees helps keep your house cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. Plus, if you plant fruit trees, we planted 4 fruit trees, you guys, and it's really fun to eat peaches when the raccoons don't get them. At any rate. Save water by not landscaping with water-intensive plants, and tankless water heaters use less energy and less water. And I always tell my grandbabies, if it's yellow, let it mellow. Don't flush all the time. And being careful to teach them that we need to conserve water. And collecting your runoff in rain barrels is a good way to water your garden. And if you have time to make an organic garden, go for it. It's better for you, better for our pollinators, because as you know, our pollinators are under great stress. And you will get a lot of joy out of planting pollinator-friendly flowers, I think. Of course, we need to take some policy actions. I'm sorry to report that the climate bill, or the energy bill that Senator Pacheco put out last month, or maybe 6 weeks ago, which would have taken us in front of California, guys. It would have really changed Massachusetts, let Massachusetts be a leader in renewables. Did not make it through the representatives. But that doesn't mean it's too late. We can continue to advocate for a carbon tax. I really love the plan where they tax carbon and then give the proceeds back to the community. And I think that would be, people would go for that. You can look at Citizens Climate Lobby. Talk to candidates who run for office and ask them what their stance are. My daughter and son-in-law, they live in Hoboken along with 2 of my grandbabies. And last year, Hoboken was having a mayoral contest. So they work all the time, but I was babysitting grandbabies. So while they were in school, I walked around and met all the candidates running for the mayor of Hoboken to find out which one was going to be the most favorable to the environment. And I found the men, finally. There were like 5 or 6 candidates by talking to everybody about what their platform was. And believe it or not because I talked to him, but because of good fortune and other people obviously knowing, he won. So Hoboken is doing some really exciting things right now in terms of renewable energy. But the only way you'll know that is if you talk to them and find out. Of course, divesting from fossil fuel stocks helps, and investing in renewable energy. And I suggest joining a climate activist organization. Obviously, Climate Reality is a good one. You get lots of information and you meet nice people. But there's also the Sierra Club. They've been doing this a long time. There's NRDC, there's EDF, there's Citizens Climate Lobby, 350.org, the League of Conservation Voters, the Audubon Society. Whatever you love is what you should join, because they need you. Climate voters. And if Wayland has a conservation plan, it would help if you support it. And carbon sequestration is really important. If there are projects for that, help out with that. Planting trees, reforestation, wetlands restoration. But the biggest thing you can do is talk about this issue with your friends. Talk about it. We're so close, guys. We are so close to going from sort of the fringe, right, to being a mass movement. It doesn't take that many people to change it. And I hope you will all consider doing that, because we need you. We need you, the world needs you, and everybody can do something, right? Next week, on the 8th, there is a climate march in Boston again, if you can go, and also one in Framingham and Worcester. So you can choose. And then I have 4 other reasons for making changes. Those are my grandbabies. And I know that you have some too. So thank you very, very much. And if you want to discuss or ask questions, if I can answer them, I will. And if I can't, I'll tell you the truth. And I'll write it down and find out.
It's unfortunate that, there was a 3:50 meeting tonight as well as your talk. There was a 3:50 meeting, and I think that accounts possibly for the lower turnout than otherwise you might find.
In Wayland or?
Right here in Wayland, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad. We should have done a joint meeting.
Yeah, I know, I was thinking that, and I should have suggested it a while back, before, because it's not fixed in stone, but, you know.
Yes, sir.
What I'm surprised is that we don't see more buildings with rooftop, solar panels. Is there any organization that is pushing for that? Or maybe zoning, town zoning?
Well, I don't know that it's an issue for town zoning. It's an issue of businesses that own those buildings, right?
But if, you know what I'm saying, I guess if the town had an ordinance, I should say, not a zoning, town ordinances, do they exist?
Well, I don't know in general. I just, he knows maybe.
There is no necessarily, but I mean, that was one of the big things in Germany, is that they had the, sort of one of the forerunners in the green roof movement, which does cut down on the need for heating and air conditioning of the municipal buildings.
So every building has a roof,
Yeah.
and
I mean, that most towns around here have like a sustainable Wayland, they have organizations that are volunteer, and they oftentimes organize, I mean, we've had drives here in Wayland a couple of times where they get a solar company to come in and try to get as many people here. And solar is one of, you mentioned trees, I mean, that is one of the real problems with solar. Like I have neighbors to my south who have very large trees. So I can't put solar panels on my house
right,
because.
no, I was thinking more of buildings,
Commercial.
Right.
commercial,
Yeah.
I know the same thing with me. I sort of say, I mean, I did a review of my house, and I'd have to cut down trees, so when you cut down the trees, you lose the oxygen, and you sort of take from here to
You
get
may,
power.
you may still be able to do solar hot water though, that doesn't
Yeah.
take so much.
And
Yes.
these days, there are, you know, these solar farms you see as you drive around.
Right, you know, looks good.
You know, and so you can sign up, even if you can't put them on your house, you can sign up to get all your electrons from solar.
Right, I know that, yeah, right. I know there was a period of time where Eversource had an option where you could choose
Right.
from just regular versus,
Yeah, there still are all renewable,
but now they
Options
changed
you
it now.
can buy.
Eversource itself,
Yeah.
they commingle it,
Right.
but you can still go to a separate company and buy it.
Yeah.
right? No, but I'm thinking, I mean, there's so many buildings in the cities that so much potential to put up, you know, solar panels on top of the roofs. And I've seen them like in some places, such as parking garages, like at Natick Mall. Some of the parking garages there.
And here at the high school.
At the
and
high school
parking
here,
lots,
right.
yeah, doing it in
So
town building.
that would be, I guess it would take some involvement in town ordinances
Yeah,
maybe.
I think-
It does take a lot of space. I mean, if you go to Longfellow, for example, they have a lot of solar panels on there, and they use that electricity. I've talked to them, and, I mean, it's basically covering a huge, big roof, and it
Right.
doesn't even produce half of their energy use, so.
But at least it's
But
half.
it's, yeah, it's
Well,
good. This stuff's
If
good,
it's
but
40%.
Yeah.
it gives you a good idea how much space you need to generate that kind
Right,
of
right.
electricity.
it's also true though that the panels are getting dramatically more efficient.
Yes.
Yes.
they go-
That would
sure.
change
You know, over the
also.
next 5 years, I think the
No, no, it's a
expectation
great
is that-
thing, I'm just saying that even the top of a big, like a
Right.
10-story building, there's a lot of energy being used in that
In
building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of waste too. I mean, there's a waste.
There's
In
also
buil-
fairs.
in buildings, there's a lot of waste. I mean, that's-
How large is the network that Al Gore is sponsoring, you know, in the training session that you went? I mean, how many people go there? I mean, I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago when he started
Right.
doing that and hadn't heard anything
Yeah,
since then, so.
they keep growing. He just did one in LA with 2,000 people from all over the world.
And each person has to go back and agree to do presentations in their local communities? and-
Yeah, or wherever you can.
Yep.
And I've 10 a year, so you guys are number 9.
Okay.
So I'm gonna overachieve, because that's my modus operandi, but, because I've got some more scheduled in Massachusetts and some in Florida. But it's a real pleasure to do it, because if it burns in your soul, you don't have a choice.
Mhm.
Listen, I almost forgot something, guys. This is really important. This website is so interesting. It's environmentalworkinggroup.org, and you can put your zip code in there, and they will tell you exactly what's in your drinking water. Now, I have a question for you. I put in Sanibel, and I put in Lincoln. Guess which one has cleaner water? Sanibel's a small island, in case you don't know. Guess which one you think has cleaner water?
Okay.
Yes. Because we have better standards here, you know, we have
Yeah.
better standards in Massachusetts. We're so lucky to live in the
A
state.
little bit less tourism,
Pardon?
a little less tourism as well. A little
Yeah.
less pressure per square mile,
Well, yeah, Lincoln,
yeah.
I thought of that part. But there's radium and all kinds of stuff in Sanibel water, and we don't even have a hospital there, so we don't know how it got this.
So that's maybe naturally occurring, or,
Well, it could be.
yeah,
That's also true in Fort Myers, that they have a lot of stuff from the hospital.
yeah, I mean, fresh water is a challenge in Florida generally, so.
Anyway, I love this website. It also can tell you what's in the cleaners you use in your house, and to give just a lot of good information.
That website there goes into the cleaners and other things like that?
Yeah,
Oh,
and what you put on your body, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
lotion and stuff like that too.
because I used to have a website that doesn't exist anymore, so it'd be good to know about that one.
No, this one I just discovered. I think it's just to cast me out.
I just have a question. You said it in Lincoln, no more plastics. When you say no more plastic,
Well, I can't say, obviously, it's only single-serve water bottles. Probably they're going to have bigger water bottles.
right, but when you talk about no plastic, I mean, I know in Wayland we have no shopping bags anymore, plastic bags. Oh God, I mean, I still have so many plastic bags at home. The newspaper, every day, 2 bags. There's so much that it's non-recyclable, so meat is wrapped up in plastics. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And as you say, if you buy a certain fruit or vegetable, they're wrapped up in plastic. Come on, I mean, why are they wrapped in plastic? Like you said, you buy, especially organic stuff, they probably wrap them in plastic for what? In the supermarket, I mean, which is asinine. And so in Lincoln, there are many things still wrapped up in plastic in supermarkets, I would think, no?
Well, there's only one supermarket, Donovan's.
Well, what are,
And I was talking about Market Basket in
Waltham?
Waltham. Yeah. At least, I don't think Donlin.
It's not gonna eliminate plastic, that's for sure, but it's at least a step toward trying to cut back on some of the waste. And it's interesting, a lot of the, you know, like, I think France and England have both recently had similar bans at a national level. As the policies start grassroots, they can become more significant.
I love this video somebody sent me on YouTube about in Italy, they're using pasta for straws.
Yeah.
Pasta.
They always
Oh,
really.
yeah.
Let's take pasta, sure.
So it's
Why
good.
not? And a lot of times we don't need a straw. The other day we were in a restaurant, and it was nice, the young woman, the waitress said, do you want a straw? We said no. At least they're asking. So that's,
Progress.
That's progress, baby steps at least,
right.
You know, one of the things I'm married to this speaker, but, so I've got to sit in a lot of these talks, and I've noticed that, most of the time, the audience are people like you who already are pretty well, you know, steeped in an understanding and a commitment. And I think, you know, one of your goals is to get to people who aren't as engaged yet, and I think that, you know, the fact that there are so many people coming to these kinds of events who are, gives us an opportunity for this to kind of, for each of us to kind of ripple out
So
and try to connect with
There's a
people.
really interesting poll result that came out about 6 months ago. And it showed that, it asked how many, tried to figure out how many people thought global warming was real and climate change was real. And it was a 69% or something, so it was a reasonably large number. But then it asked how many of, what percentage of people are, you know, are willing to talk to their neighbors or anyone else about the problem. And it was minuscule. I mean, it was like 75% would not talk to anybody about it.
Wow.
Because it becomes
So
political.
it's something that it has, somehow it has become it's like, I won't talk about religion, politics, or global warming. I mean, it's like, what is this?
Or even
But,
football at this point.
so it's a very weird
Yeah.
kind of social stigma about it.
Yeah, well, I guess the more we talk about it, the more, you know, like any stigma, if it gets more light shined on it, it's less likely to preserve.
Just keep talking about it.
Yeah, it takes
So-
work. It takes work in how you talk about it, you know.
I was gonna mention the bit about eating meat. That's really significant.
It is.
You know, I think if we all cut down to like 1 or 2 times a week, it would be the equivalent of taking thousands and thousands of cars off the road. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's not because, and it's because, and when you talk about meat, you're really talking about beef and mutton, because it's animals that eat grass and chew grass and have double stomachs and things, because they produce all this methane. They burp out all this methane, and so those big herds of cows, the reason that they're a problem, more than anything else, is they produce this intense global warming gas, and lots of it. And the only reason we have that many, there are more sheep in New Zealand by far than people. The reason we have all those is because we eat that stuff. If we weren't eating them, they wouldn't be around.
I know. And with developing countries getting more money, they have a demand for more meat too. So
And
it's-
also, by the time a lot of that meat gets to our plate, it's not that healthy.
And it's been, and a lot of energy's gone into processing it. There's a lot of things, but if we didn't
Yeah.
raise all those animals, it would make a huge dent
Massive.
in the problem.
And
But
those
it-
big massive feedlot or whatever
The
you call them,
feedlots are
they're just, I
horrible.
mean, there's just, it's horrible on many levels.
But the thing that's encouraging about that is, as an example, is that, and I think the list you put up there is sort of symbolic of a lot of people making relatively small changes can have pretty sweeping impacts, especially if you pick the right things.
But it's really easy to get lulled into, okay, I've changed my light bulbs, I've done this, so now I've done my thing. I mean, until we really get social action for.
What happens in the legislature matters a lot
Absolutely.
too, because,
That's
you
what,
know,
but that's the way you
caps on,
get social
you
action
know, all these
ultimately.
various caps on things, and the
No.
equity's not there. Vulnerable communities.
Carbon pricing you had up there, I mean, that's,
Renewable energy.
we
That's
should
pretty
all work for
fundamental.
that, because until Americans, I don't know, we respond to anything the way we respond to price. I mean, if we don't make it economically advantageous to conserve, we won't collectively do it until that day. And so we've gotta make it that way, we've gotta put the price on it that forces people to move away
And
from.
it's not artificial, I mean, that's money we're spending for future generations, you know, so it's.
But that's a
really-
calculation you can make,
Yeah.
it isn't what happens to your pocketbook.
No, I'm saying that it's valid,
Yeah.
to do it, yeah.
The other day I was at a stop to eat a sandwich home, while I was driving someplace, and I stopped at this dog park where people bring the dogs to walk them. And I said to myself, God, everybody's got a plastic bag in their hands,
Right.
you know? If towns, and I was thinking of this, I like to get involved with this idea. If we all got together and have town ordinances, maybe to say no more plastic bags to pick up, drop them.
The alternative?
The alternative would be some kind of a heavier paper bag.
Well, they make a biodegradable plastic that's plant-based.
But that takes a long time to degrade.
The biodegradable
pla-
one,
the
did
pla-
you?
Yeah, there are, but we
Right,
don't
yeah.
use them very quickly, they seem to biodegrade in my cupboard.
You do
Mine
it.
too.
Before I can even get them out.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Plastic bags?
No, that is not a regular plastic bag, it's actually a biodegradable pet bag.
Oh, pet bag. Oh,
Yeah, so it's
okay.
not,
Oh, so they do make it?
They do make
Oh,
it.
okay.
They
So,
make
so
us
if there's an ordinance,
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
then we need
Yeah.
to use that.
gotta get rid of the bread bags.
I'm sorry?
Gotta get rid of those plastic bread bags,
Plastic,
gotta get rid of all
right,
that.
Yeah, I mean,
Extra stuff.
millions of dogs.
Lots of
And
places.
nothing against the dogs, I love dogs, but there's millions of plastic bags.
Oh, yeah.
They just end up in,
Yeah.
you know,
Out in the middle of the ocean.
in the middle of the ocean.
Not necessarily, though. I think in Wayland, we have the trash goes to
Yeah.
energy, so
Well, and
if the
fleece.
plastic's being burned.
Plastic bags, at least, can be turned into fleece garments, so.
No, no, but.
Well, yeah, but the problem with the fleece
If you
garments is
use-
every time you wash them, those microplastics
yeah.
end up back in the ocean,
That's right, that's right.
and in the fish, so
But if
the
you get a
fleece
bag-
is
But
terrible.
if you use a
material.
plastic bag.
I'm gonna
to
get
pick up
these,
the dog's
because you're
crap,
married to her.
you know,
All right,
every day.
thanks.
Now, that would go into trash and that would be burned here in Wayland, so that would be okay.